Hello everybody and welcome back. This is Mr. Henson. Today we're talking about nutrients. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about? Well, the first group of nutrients we're going to discuss is our carbohydrates. Now you've also probably come across these before. Below here in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see some images of the different foods that you might find the chemical group carbohydrates in. So we're talking about our potatoes, our vegetables, starchy vegetables, plenty of it in sugars, in fruit, milk products, and nuts and cereal. Okay, are great sources of carbohydrates. Also, foods like rice and pasta are an excellent source of carbohydrate. Okay, so carbohydrates can come in two main forms. They come in simple sugars, like this one over here. Now I know it looks very complicated, but it's actually a bit more simple than you think, and you don't need to remember this structure, but this is glucose. Okay, so glucose is what we call a simple sugar. So that's one of the simple forms of a carbohydrate. Okay, it's like one sugar or one individual unit. Okay, and we can get lots of these joined together to make up more complex carbohydrates. Okay, so if we look over here, this is one molecule of glucose, this is another molecule of glucose, and you can see they've been joined together. The same here, the same here. Okay, so this would be an example of a more complex carbohydrate like starch or glycogen. Okay, we need, of course, carbohydrates. They're a great source of energy, and it's probably the main our main source of energy comes from the carbohydrates that we eat. If we eat too much of them, they can be converted into fat and stored in the body, which is useful. But of course, if we do eat too much, we can find ourselves getting overweight by eating too many of them. So when we eat something like fruits or vegetables, more like fruits, the sugars that are in them are already quite simple. So we get energy from them quite quickly. Same as if we're eating a candy bar or a chocolate bar, also have these sugars in them. Okay, and these types of carbohydrates we call quick release energy because the energy is very, very easily accessed. Okay, we break that glucose down very quickly via digestion, and we respire it to produce energy. Whereas with our slow release sugars like starch and glycogen, these take a bit longer to be broken down through digestion, and so we call them slow release. When we're looking at what's in these, we can look at the different elements that we might find in them. So you can see the different letters that appear, CH and O. Now you shouldn't be able to see any other elements other than those three, C, H, and O. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, okay, which makes up our carbohydrate. The 8 at the end of carbohydrate means that oxygen is present. Now, the interesting thing about carbohydrates is there is a fixed ratio of hydrogens to carbons. So if you look in this molecule of glucose here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons. Okay, and if we count the hydrogens, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you've got a factor of 2 to 1. So 2 hydrogens to every carbon, and that is fixed for all carbohydrates. Okay, so it's just something to remember. The next chemical group we're looking at is our lipids, or our fats and our lipids. Okay, so again, we know what kind of foods contain fats and lipids. Vegetable oils, oils from animal fats contain lots of fat. Okay, we also find lots of fats in things like nuts as well. Now, fats consist of simple units called fatty acids. Okay, so you can see a fatty acid here. This is a fatty acid, and this is a fatty acid. Okay, we call this type of fat a triglyceride because it's got one fatty acid, two fatty acids, three fatty acids all joined together. And so when we break fats down, okay, when fats go into our body, the enzymes that work on them will break them down into fatty acids, and often have a glycerol head, which is this bit. Okay, so fatty acids and glycerol are the simple units of our fats or our lipids. We need fats. They are essential to our diet. We need them for insulation in our bodies, so we store them in certain places and helps keep our body temperature at a stable 37 degrees. We also need them to create certain types of molecules in our bodies, like steroid hormones, like the sex hormones, estrogen, testosterone. Okay, both of those hormones have fats in them. They also play a very, very important role in the formation of cell membranes. Okay, if we actually look more closely at cell membranes, we call them a phospholipid membrane, meaning that they contain lipids. Okay, moving on. The third group we're going to come to is our proteins. So protein is found in lots of it in nuts, in meat, in fish, cheese, eggs, chicken is a very good source of protein. Okay, so these are all excellent sources of protein. And if you remember proteins, you might remember that the actual building blocks of proteins are called amino acids. Okay, now amino acids contain much like the similar stuff that you might find in a fat. So they've got hydrogen, they've got carbon, and they've got oxygen. But the difference in them is that they contain something called nitrogen. They contain the element nitrogen. And that's something that's very, very important, okay? That's the only chemical, it's the only one of the chemical groups which contains nitrogen. And we need nitrogen, okay? That's what's essential for our amino acids or our proteins, so that they contain this nitrogen. Okay, there are about 20 different amino acids that we can get from, that our bodies can get from the different foods that we eat. And so the amino acids might be represented by this. These are all different amino acids. Okay, now the general amino acid structure, they are very, very similar to one another. So they all have this group here. They all have a carbon in the middle, and they all have this group at the other side, and they all have this H. What makes them different is what we call this R group down here, which can consist of lots of different chemicals. And that's what makes our amino acids different from one another. That's why this one's green, and this one's orange, and this one's blue, and this one's red. It's because they all have a different R group, but they all have exactly the same things otherwise. They all have this amine group or amino group. They all have a carboxyl group. Okay? When we join them together, when we join amino acids together, they make up proteins. So proteins have many functions in our body. All enzymes are proteins. Okay, they're used to transport oxygen. So hemoglobin, which is in red blood cells, transports oxygen. Their structural materials, i.e. the tissues that we find in our muscles, are proteins. We need them to make hormones like insulin. Okay, and the hormone insulin is a protein. And we also need them to make antibodies, obviously, which are very, very important in fighting pathogens. So proteins, very, very important group of chemicals. Okay, in order to get them, of course, we have to take in protein in the form of meat or milk. We digest those proteins, break them down into their amino acids, transport them to our cells, and then rebuild them into the proteins that we want from them. We also need vitamins. The two really important vitamins that you guys got to remember, of course, are vitamin D and vitamin C. Main source of vitamin D comes from sunlight. And the main source of vitamin C comes from citrus fruits. Strawberries, tomatoes, green peppers are also excellent sources. Now, you'll probably remember from Key Stage 3 that if you don't get enough vitamin C, there is a condition called scurvy, which can cause what we call bleeding gums. It can also cause your teeth to fall out. Not a very, very nice condition, but obviously rectified by eating plenty of vitamin C. If we don't get enough vitamin D, we can get a condition called rickets, which you can see here. What that means is our bones become very, very soft. and bendy, because we need that vitamin D because it absorbs calcium. So if there's no vitamin D in our bodies, our bones can't absorb any calcium. So we can make this vitamin D ourselves in our skin, but only if we get plenty of sunlight. We also need very small amounts of minerals. Okay, so vitamins and minerals we actually only need in very small amounts. You can see here that we need something called Fe, which is iron, and we also need calcium. So why do we need iron, and where would we get iron from? So we get iron, it comes, a lot of it, we get it from red meat. We also get it from eggs and green foods. Okay. We need iron to make something called hemoglobin, which is the protein that we find in our red blood cells. So if we don't get enough iron, we don't make hemoglobin, and it means our blood cells don't carry as much oxygen, which can make us very, very tired. That condition is called anemia. With calcium, of course, calcium we find a lot of in milk and dairy products. If we don't get enough calcium, we get a condition called osteoporosis, which is where our bones become a little bit brittle. So you can see in this bottom right-hand corner here, you've got spaces inside the bones, okay, compared to the normal bones, and this can actually make them much, much weaker, much more susceptible to actually breaking. So osteoporosis is a very, very serious condition, but if we get plenty of calcium in our diet, it shouldn't be a problem. Fiber. Okay, fiber is an indigestible part of food. So when we eat green vegetables, certain parts of fruits, they contain a lot of cellulose, which is in the cell walls of those foods, and this provides the bulk of our feces. So when we eat these foods, that cellulose is not being digested, it's not being broken down, and what it does is, as it's going through our alimentary canal, which is the tube which connects our mouth to our anus, it pushes out against that kind of the wall of that canal, and helps push the food along. Now, the way that food moves along is called peristalsis, which we'll look at when we look at digestion. But it's just the way food moves through our digestive system. And so it's really, really, really important. If we don't get enough of it, we can become very constipated. And maybe a factor actually also has been linked to the development of bowel cancer. And the last thing we might need in our diet, of course, is water. All right, so why do we need water in our diet? So water forms about 70% of the human body, and about 2/3 of that 70% goes in the form of cytoplasm inside our cells. So very, very important as a medium in which certain chemical reactions can occur in. We need it for helping our body absorb nutrients. We need it for making up our muscles. And of course, lots of other reasons as well. Now, we lose a lot of water each day. We breathe it out we actually make it during respiration, but we also lose it in urine, feces, and sweat. And so we do need to replace it and need to keep ourselves hydrated. So if we're actually losing, if we lose about 5% of your body's water, that can cause you to become unconscious. A loss of 10% of your body's water would become fatal. So it's very, very important that we keep hydrated. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and see you again.